I've shared that when I was in high school, my introduction to Buddhism was basically you need to let go of your attachments and not be caught in desire. And I thought that meant that desire was bad. And it was quite a number of years till I came back around to Buddhism. But it was a misunderstanding. And it's one that I see in a lot of people, because the teachings are not that desire is bad. In fact, desire goes hand in hand with existing. There's no existence without desire. You wouldn't be here if it weren't for desire, really. And filling desire can be temporarily pleasant, and not having it filled can be temporarily unpleasant, but it's being caught that's the suffering. Okay? It's the caught part of it. It's where there's a hook, where and we're going to look in our lives where we have that hook, where there's a sense of, I have to have this to be happy. I have to have this to feel okay. If life doesn't cooperate in this way, it's really not okay. Okay. One Thai forest monk, Ajahn Chah, very, very well known, inspired a lot of this generation's teachers in Western Buddhism. It was known that he'd walk around his monastery, and when he'd see one of the monastics looking like they're having a hard time, he'd go up to them and say, "You must be very attached." And that was his comment, "You must be very attached." And then the invitation would be, okay, where's the hook? So I do think of our attachments and addictions when they reach the very strong locked-in way as a flag. And as a flag, it's really a flag that we've left home. It's a flag that our attentions and energies are fixated outside ourselves, and in some way we've pulled away from our own awareness and our own heart. And if we can pay attention to where we're stuck, where we're most stuck, if you can really get it, this is where I'm hooked, and if we're willing to pay attention, to deepen our attention, then that very place of stuckness, the hook, actually becomes a portal to a very profound transformation and freedom. And that's the promise. So this class, what we'll do is there'll be an inquiry into where our attachments, our addictions, constricting our life force. Where, for each of us. And again, it can get very, very subtle. The more you've been working on the spiritual path and deepening attention, the more you find more and more very, very subtle, hard to detect places where there's some holding on. I think the best nutshell summary that was given of freedom is that to cling to nothing at all whatsoever as mine, as me or mine. So it's a non-clinging. And so the first question to ask is, well, what actually is desire? Because it's considered this universal energy that all life desires to exist, to flourish. And I remember some years ago, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I read a really interesting article in the New York Times Science section that described how a mathematically perfectly balanced universe couldn't exist. In other words, if matter and antimatter were exactly equal, they'd cancel each other out. Okay? But, and there was one of those demonstrations in the FEMI National Accelerator Lab where they created a little mini universe and show what happened right after the Big Bang. And they show in collisions that there is a slight bias of certain elements in the electron to its charged opposite. So there's this cosmically minuscular leaning towards attraction, so that rather than canceling each other out, existence happens. Now, my understanding doesn't go any deeper than that. But it's, to me, what the intuition is that formless being wants to manifest. It's like the ocean wants to have waves, and that the ocean knows itself through the appearance of waves. That's my favorite way of describing it to myself, that it's an integral part of this whole universe, that we awaken through perceiving, form, then the ocean perceives itself through the ways we perceive what we are, this awareness and love through forms. So it's an organizing principle. And desire takes on different dimensions of aliveness. It takes on the dimension of the desire for food, to connect with food in the material plane, to be alive, and sex, and self-esteem, and feeling safe, and feeling bonded, and self-realization, and awareness itself. There are different dimensions of desire, what we yearn for. So what turns desire into attachment? In other words, where do we get some hooks and stickiness in here? The Latin word for desire is desiderare, and it means away from your star. So when there's desire, there's some sense of being away from home and a longing for homecoming. And that feels kind of intuitively true. That I think of it that our star is the energetic source of our being, the awareness that's the source of our being. And we have a longing to come home to our true nature, to really rest in our wholeness. So each dimension of desire, from gross to increasingly subtle they're expressions of aliveness, from the gross to the more and more subtle, from wanting food to wanting the enlightened experience of awareness itself. Now, the hook. If our basic needs are not met, if our basic needs for food, for security, for bonding are not met, then our attention narrows and fixates. Desire becomes fixated. Desire intensifies. And the more unmet needs, the more we get fixated until we call it attachment or addiction. And some examples are this, that they've seen with chimps, that when there's poor bonding, then the young chimp grows up not only to be very aggressive, but to be a binge eater. Okay? Just that's what it is. That's the substitute gratification. That's a primitive reward system. And then with fruit flies, and I found this from an article called Sex and Alcohol on a Very Small Scale. Male fruit flies deprived of sex may turn to alcohol as a source of pleasure. They did an experiment where they had two groups of male fruit flies, and one had sex, the other was deprived of sex. It's a cruel experiment. And the sexually deprived males overwhelmingly selected the boozy brew. They were given to either a normal mush or a boozy mush, and they drank 4 times as much as their sexually satisfied brethren. I love the way they write these articles, but anyway. But you get the idea that, and so you say, okay, so unmet needs. So what are the characteristics of attachment or suffering? And there's a feeling of lack. Something's unmet, that something's missing. Then there is a mental delusion as to what will actually bring satisfaction and happiness. That's where we hook onto substitutes that give temporary relief or pleasure, but don't really solve the problem, okay? And we grasp. Okay, so there's a feeling of need, a misperception of what's going to work, and then a grasping onto the substitute. Just a comment on this delusion, because it's really a pervasive feature of our psyche that we have ideas about what will bring us happiness, and we're regularly wrong. It's really interesting. Lottery winners are ultimately no happier than non-winners. Everybody at that Sands casino, it really didn't matter whether they were going to win or lose in terms of their happiness quotient. It's not right away. It takes some months to come back to your happiness set point, as they describe it. Paraplegics are usually as content as people can walk. We anticipate good things happening, like a job offer or a raise, or even having a child will make us happier, and that bad things will make us more miserable. And it's true, we have spikes, but it evens out. So then we look at, well, so what are our common substitutes? What are the things that most of us get hooked on? And I won't spend a long time on it because you know them mostly. That when we're missing some sense of security or bonding, maybe we'll go for accumulating wealth or overwork and proving ourselves, or maybe, it will be on physical beauty or social status or power. There's a little line that says, when women get depressed, they eat or shop, and when men are depressed, they attack another country, So one of the most pervasive false refuges are substitute gratifications. I think of them as the same thing. Is this never-ending effort to try to improve ourselves, and it's not the kind of improve ourselves of, really sensing the creativity and the knowledge we long for, but really a kind of like from a deficit, I need to be a better person kind of striving. There's a cartoon I've always loved that has a dog on the psychiatrist's couch, and he's saying to the psychiatrist, it's always good dog this and good dog that, but is it ever great dog? And that's what goes on in us. This is part of the hungry ghost, that so wanting to feel like we're good enough. I mean, if we're honest, how many of us are really content and feel good enough? Again, I'm not talking about the kind of impulse to manifest our true potential. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kind of internalized standards we have that make us think we should always look better, do more, be more. Now, I've been naming socially condoned substitutes. And of course, we all know that the more there's unmet needs, the more we get hooked on substitutes that are really, really quite harmful in an overt way, whether that is binge eating, or drugs, alcohol, sexual compulsions, gambling. Okay. They're really difficult to work with because, and they also, there's genetic tendencies towards some of these, because the more we do it, the more they create a whole psychobiology in us that keeps them going, and some are purely biologically addictive. So again, but they're all unmet needs. And like the chimps and like the fruit flies, we can blame ourselves, but it's conditioning. We can say, I lack willpower and I'm a bad person, and we're going to talk about how we do that, but it's conditioning. So let's look at the suffering that comes from attachment, because some of it's really obvious, like the suffering of losing a job and a marriage because you've been drinking too much or using cocaine. But there's all different levels. One level of the suffering is that we really don't get satisfied, that there's never that sense of enough. And you might ask yourself, how many moments in your life there's really that feeling like, well, I could die right now. I mean, this is the fullness and the enoughness. This is it. There's not that sense. So there's that we can't get no satisfaction thing, that it's like always wanting more. Story of a man on a California beach in deep prayer, and says out loud, Lord, please grant me one wish. And the sky clouds over and the booming voice comes, well, because you've tried to be faithful, I'll grant you one wish. So the man says, please, Lord, build me a bridge to Hawaii so I can drive over any time I need to see beautiful sights and alleviate the stress in my life. The Lord said, that's a very materialistic kind of a request. Think of the logistics, to go over the Pacific, the concrete and steel would take, and so on. Very resource intensive. Anyway, he says, take some time, think of another wish. So the man thought about it for a long time. Finally he said, Lord, I wish that I could understand women. I want to know what women really want, how women can really be made happy. And after a few moments, God said, you want 2 lanes on that or 4 lanes on that bridge? The AA saying that one drink may make you feel like a new person. Then the new person has to have a drink, right? So it's like that. Wanting begets wanting is the idea, and the typical metaphor is it's like drinking salt water to satisfy thirst. So that's one level of suffering. We don't get satisfied. The second I alluded to a little bit before, which is that along with the hungry ghost energy of wanting, we have an aversion towards ourselves for that. How many of you have noticed the shame or self-hatred that comes along with the wanting mind? How many of you have noticed that? Okay. It's a little harder to raise your hand for. In the Buddhist tradition, we call it the second arrow. The first arrow is, I want, I need, I'm not satisfied. And the second arrow is, I'm a bad person for wanting and needing and feeling I'm not satisfied. It's the self-aversion we pile on. Very, very notable as part of the addiction cycle. You know, eat too much, feel really, really bad about yourself, feel like such a bad person, and feel so miserable that you eat more, and then feel bad about yourself, and it just keeps fueling the cycle. Okay, so that's one other level of the suffering, is the self-aversion. And then the last level I'll name is when we're at our casino, when we're really waiting to win or wanting to win and not quite there yet, and it might be because we're seeking the approval, or we're trying to in some way get something we don't have, a job or whatever, we're not present. It's kind of like we're leaning forward, wanting the next moment to contain what this moment does not. And this is the heart of the suffering that comes with hungry ghosts, with wanting mind, with addiction, with attachment. That we can't be present. We're on our way somewhere else. And how many moments of our life is there some sense we're on our way to something rather than this moment counts? It's like in this, right now, listening to this talk, are we on our way to the hub of the talk, or to the end of the talk, or to what we're doing later tonight, or to the weekend, or... It's such a deeply grooved habit to have some discontent and feel something's missing and that we need something more, that we can skim over the surface and not really arrive and take in the sunset, or feel the wind on our cheek, or see the gleam in a child's eyes, or hear the child's laugh. You know, we're not able to connect, be right here, which is ultimately what desire is wanting. It's like we're away from our star. Can we come back? So we can't be happy. And the deep teaching here is that the real way we meet desire, the real way we find happiness, it arises from presence. The only place you can really be happy is when there's an openness and a wakefulness and a tenderness right here. So the pursuit of the hungry ghost actually blocks presence. It blocks us from feeling the light of our own spirit, the light of that star. The word desire, away from our star, the satisfaction of desire is recognizing that our star, the light and love we seek, is here. It's in this moment. And as long as we fixate outside ourselves, we can't experience that. So this is key, that the healing from attachment or addiction is really discovering how to find the spirit that's always been here, but feels like it's been draining out or empty. How to discover that star that's inside us, the light in our own heart. Because when we do, when there's a sense that it's right here, there's still a natural play of desires. And we can enjoy when those particular focused desires are met, and we can not enjoy it when they're not. But there's a basic sense of contentment. There's not craving. I love, there's a cartoon that has a picture of a dog who's having a dream, and it says, Zen dog dreaming of medium-sized bone.